Hello and welcome back. This is part two of DDI 101, data-driven instruction. I'm going to start again, Barry, because nobody's watching.
Okay.
Take two. Hello and welcome back. This is part two of DDI 101, data-driven instruction. Today we're looking at the second part of this session, prepare and see it. There will be three parts of this session, so there will be another part after this. And we certainly invite you back for that part as well. The first part was a couple of weeks ago. You may have watched that live, or you may have seen it in the self-paced version as well. But we do want to make sure that you have participated in that. And so if you happen to be watching this on a recording today, we certainly want to ask you at this point to stop and find part one and really begin there, because a lot of this will make a whole lot more sense if you've seen part one of this as well. If you're watching live as well, we'd certainly recommend that you view that and view those in a self-paced version as well. But of course, if you're with us, you're of course welcome to stay. So my name is Jeff Smith. I'm a campus coach with Region 11. I won't go through all of the introduction that I did last time, but I'm very happy to be co-facilitating today with my good friend, Derek Spurlock.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And again, my name is Derek Spurlock. I am the Manager of Instructional Leadership here at Region 11, and we are ecstatic about our part two, because in our part two session, we will be doing some heavy lifting as far as preparing for a DDI meeting. Dr. Smith?
So these are our session objectives for today. You, the participant, will demonstrate key actions needed to prepare for a data meeting, and those things would include creating that no-show chart, creating a teacher exemplar, and then upgrading that teacher exemplar with student exemplars. You'll also look at identifying the gap in student learning, such a crucial step, and then also naming the gap, which I believe is just as important as identifying, is making sure that everybody is very well aware of that. So we certainly hope to achieve all of these objectives today, and we hope that you will be able to accomplish these things with us as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Smith. So as we discussed in part one, the driving force behind the data-driven instruction meeting is the see it, name it, do it process. So what I would like for us to do, just since we've slept since our last session, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of ground yourself in that thinking of the see it, name it, do it. As Dr. Smith mentioned in our objectives today, we're going to live heavily in the preparation stage of the DDI meeting. Now, the preparation stage is the part of the meeting where we will prepare prior to the scheduling of the data meeting. And you're gonna understand it a lot more as we go through the process. Now, before we do that, what I would like us to do is, I want us to take a moment, and we're gonna go back to the bit.ly that you see at the very bottom of your screen. If you would, access that bit.ly, and when you go to your bit.ly, I would like for you to access your weekly data meeting cheat sheet. Remember, that's the one that says WDM, leading teacher teams to analyze student daily work. That was a protocol that we analyzed in part one, in which you're gonna see come up on the screen in just a moment. Now, as that is pulling up, we are going to live today in the prepare and a see it stage. So once you click that, just to kind of reacclimate our minds, we're going to take an opportunity to go ahead and read the see it portion. So we're going to go and read the see it portion. Now remember, last session, we had an opportunity to watch a video of Principal Stinson going through this process with her teachers. And if you remember, when we had an opportunity, we looked at the see it and the part of the name it portion. So right now, I want you to just reacclimate your thinking, and I want you to take about 1 minute to just read the see it portion. So see past success, see the exemplar, and see the gap. So let's go ahead and take several minutes to go ahead and just reacclimate our thinking to this part of the script of the data meeting. So we're gonna go ahead and pause for about several minutes so you can come back, and we will go ahead and resume with our next portion. Okay, now what we're gonna do is, next slide, please. Okay, so now you had an opportunity to go through that part of the meeting. We're going to, as I mentioned before, do some heavy lifting by doing a pre-work activity. And this pre-work activity is gonna be a scenario in which you're gonna pretend that you are gonna become a facilitator of a 7th grade writing DDI meeting. And prior to this DDI meeting, we're going to live in what takes place before I facilitate a data meeting. So that's regardless of what subject area. Anytime I have a scheduled meeting, the prepare part is what I'm going to do before I actually go to the data meeting. Now, to do this, I want you to go back to your WDM and you're going to look at the prepare section. So far we read the see it portion. I want you to go back up to the prepare section. And I want to give you several minutes just to read in the prepare section, what are some of the materials that I need to have? And let's kind of go through this together. If you're looking at your WDM, in which I am, you're going to see that you're going to ID a student exemplar. You're going to have teachers to turn in student work. The student work that teachers are going to turn in is high, medium, and low student work. You're going to also ensure that you have a script. If you look at Prime the Pump, it says script the reteach plan and the gap in student understanding, unpack the standard. So those are going to be the 2 areas that we're going to focus on today. What does this look like in preparation? So if you would, I want you to go back to your bit.ly. And when you go back to your bit.ly, I want to give you an opportunity to go into your folder, and the folder that you're going to go into is the 7th grade writing case study folder. So the first thing I want you to do before you go there is, let's go back to the resources. So in the resources, you're going to access the blank no-show chart. You see that number 1 is there. You're going to use that template to unpack your standard. So that document looks like that. And then we're going to go to your resource folder. Now, when we go to your resource folder, and in fact, that's going to be the 7th grade writing case study folder. When you hear me refer to that case folder, don't go through it right now. I just wanted you to know that it's accessible here. When we get to certain components, we're going to be pulling from this folder. And when we pull from this folder, I will name for you what document you need to open. But right now, the only document that you need to open is that number 1 that you just got out your resource folder, which is the no-show chart. Okay, so this is our no-show chart. On your no-show chart, you have been given the standard that we're going to be addressing here in the data meeting. Now, before we really get into unpacking the standard, I want to go back to our slide deck because there were some things that I mentioned to you that takes place in the preparation. We just read on our WDM some things that need to occur. So let's go ahead and go to our next slide and make sure if you are a facilitator, and typically facilitators would be the principal, the assistant principal, an instructional coach, or a department lead. We really recommend that if this is not the culture of your campus, that you should start off leading with an administrator, preferably a principal, as you build capacity of your leadership team, which would be your assistant principal, as well as your instructional coach and our department chair. So again, if this is not currently the culture of your campus, I highly recommend you start administratively with the principal leading a data meeting. But remember, before you lead a data meeting, these are some things that you need to request from your teacher. And that's on the slide. We need to identify what the power standard is going to be. Now, the power standard, just to kind of give you a definition of what is a power standard. A power standard is typically the standard that is highly tested on your STAR or whichever document here in the state of Texas we use the STAR to our EOC. Whatever TEAC is heavily tested on the STAR or EOC will become your power standard if students have not mastered that. So a great tool to use for this would be Lead Forward. or your current data system that you have in your district. You want to look at, for the last 3 to 5 years, what standard was heavily tested that our kids did not do well on. That would be your power standard. That would be the standard that you would want to bring into a data meeting. Now, often I get the question, well, Mrs. Spurlock, how many standards should we try to cover in a data meeting? The answer to that question is 1. In most DDI meetings, you only have anywhere from 45 minutes to 90 minutes for those of you who are on block schedules. And trust me, you're going to need every part of that time to really have an effective data meeting. So I highly recommend that when you start this process off, only focus on having 1 standard, which is your power standard. That power standard is traditionally, this is a heavily tested standard that our kids have not done well on within the last 3 to 5 years. Now, often, again, another question is, well, Mr. Spurlock, what would be considered a heavily tested standard? If the standard was tested more than 6 times in a 3 to 5 year period, that would be a standard that I would highly recommend that you mark down as a power standard along with the percentage that kids have done. And then you want to go ahead and look at your instructional planning guide just to see how many data meetings are you going to have that 6 weeks or that 9 weeks, and make sure that you annotate of all of the power standards. If I have 3 meetings or 2 data meetings scheduled, then that means that of the 10 that I may have identified for that particular 6 weeks or 9 weeks, I'm going to select 2 because I have 2 data meetings, or I'm going to select 3 because I have 3 data meetings scheduled for that particular 6 weeks. Now, that's the power standard. If you notice, the second thing that you want to ensure that you have before your preparation of your data meeting is student work. Remember, in order for us to improve Tier 1 instruction in DDI, we don't do autopsy on student learning. Autopsies is what we discuss heavily in part 1, the lag measures. We don't wait for lag measures here in the DDI world. In the DDI world, we want those lead measures. We want to know right now in the moment how our student is mastering the Tier 1 instruction. So in order to impact the Tier 1 instruction, we have to ensure that we are collecting evidence of student learning when we are, after we have taught that power standard. So to do that, most districts will have in place a exit ticket, or some districts call it a DOL, demonstration of learning, or some districts may even call it an AOL, assessment of learning. But what is the assessment, the quick assessment that you're going to give to students at the end of that teaching period? So if I am teaching for the first time my power standard, at the end of that class period, I want to see how was mastery of my students. So I'm going to give them a quick assessment, exit ticket, DOL, AOL. From those assessments is where you're going to classify student work as high, medium, or low. High quite naturally being the students that mastered the content, medium are those students that were right there in the middle, and low, these kids did not pass or show mastery on this particular tee. So you want to make sure that you collect the student work from your teachers in order to make sure that this is conducive and in the best interest of a positive school culture. We highly recommend this 3rd bullet where you are, as an administrator, ensure that you create a DDI calendar. And when you create that DDI calendar, we highly recommend that you look at creating one for the semester and or the school year. We don't recommend that you do it per 6 weeks. This really needs to be thought out in advance because you want to make sure you have access to your district's testing calendar so there's no conflict between what you're doing at your campus to monitor instruction and what your district have in place as far as benchmarks. So on a DDI calendar, these are some of the things that are recommended that you put on that calendar. You want to put the date that the student work is due from your teachers. What date? And again, when you think about that date, this date needs to occur before the date of your preparation meeting. So let's say, for example, I was meeting with my leadership team, I'm the principal, and I'm preparing for a DDI meeting. My teachers would have had the standard way in advance. The teachers have had a week to teach that instruction. And then let's say Monday is my scheduled preparation date. Well, on my calendar, I would have Thursday as the date that they would turn in at the end of the day. They would turn in the student work, high, medium, and low, classified and labeled. So then that way we would have for our preparation meeting, those student artifacts. So typically the window is at least 2 days prior to your preparation meeting. Life happens. If a teacher does not turn it in for whatever reason, at the end of the day on Thursday, then that would give the leadership time on Friday to go and meet with the stakeholders to ensure that we get the work that we need to analyze during the preparation. And of course, we also want to include on our DDI calendar the actual date of the DDI meeting. So in this example that I gave a moment ago, if the preparation meeting is Monday, and I'm asking teachers to turn it in 2 days in advance, that means at the end of the day, Thursday, they're turning in all of their student samples, high, medium, and low label for that particular standard. And then let's say my data meeting may not be scheduled until that Wednesday. We highly recommend that you do not schedule data meetings on Friday. Why? Because typically Friday is the day that so many distractions take place, such as pep rallies for the football game that night, other school events, as well as absentees traditionally are higher on Fridays than any other day of the week. So we recommend that you don't do DDI meetings on Friday unless you truly understand the culture of your campus and you know that that won't be a problem at your particular school. Dr. Smith, is there anything that you would like to add in regarding preparation before DDI meeting?
Not really, Derek. I really like what you said about the culture of the campus. You've mentioned that several times, and I think that really is key here. And our participants may be looking at this and thinking, my campus culture really isn't there at this point, and that's okay. But really, it's an aspiration if it's not something that's currently an experience. And so I would just really recommend to those who are participating with us today to look at this as an aspirational thing, to build the capacity of the people that you're working with, because one of our responsibilities as leaders is to build the capacity of the people around us, to make ourselves not indispensable, but dispensable in a sense. And so to the extent that we can do that as leaders, I think that's one of the great, maybe a side benefit of this process.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And I'm glad Dr. Smith reiterated that portion about building the capacity of your teammates. And you guys heard me say, this is not something that should be done in isolation. This is not a process where if I'm facilitating that 7th grade writing meeting, then I'm the only person that's sitting there and doing the preparation. We want to build our leadership team's capacity to do that. I will want to make sure in that preparation date, and that's the reason why I'm putting it on my calendar. If I'm the principal and I'm facilitating it, I want my AP there, my assistant principal. I want my instructional coach there if I have one. And quite naturally, I want my ELAR, language arts teacher, or my writing teacher, the lead, to also be present during that particular meeting, because this is how you're going to build the capacity of your leadership team to ensure that they are going through this process with you. And also it ensures that when life happens, the data meeting can still occur. If I focus on just me being the principal, and I know I'm going to be the one facilitating the meeting, and I don't have anybody else present, and life take place on Wednesday and unforeseen occurrences happen, I'm not at the meeting. And as a result of me not being at the meeting, then that means that possibly the meeting will not occur on that Wednesday. But when you have a leadership team and you're building that capacity, if Mr. Spurlock is not there on Wednesday, that means that our student needs could still occur because 4 other people or 3 other people had the opportunity to engage in the preparation and they're ready to step in. So thank you for mentioning that again, Dr. Smith. Let's go to the next slide. So with that in mind, you've had an opportunity to really get a lot of granular information about how we should really ensure that we are setting up our preparation for success. So now what we're going to do is we're going to step into the first key action when you are preparing for a data meeting, and that's in unpacking the standards. So here on this particular slide, you're going to see the 7th grade writing strand, and on the right-hand side, you're going to see the new TEAC and you're going to see the old TEAC. Now, my ELAR teachers, you guys are used to seeing this year because you know that we're transitioning from the old standards to new standards coming up next year. And if you're not in the ELAR world, just know that, think about this from your lens. And I didn't have an opportunity to mention this before we started. We are focusing on writing. If you are a math teacher, a science teacher, or a social studies teacher, please do not abort this training, because what we are really focusing on is not content. We are focusing on skills, and these skills are transferable despite the content area. So I need you to hang in there with me. If you're not a English teacher, English teachers, if you guys would, also make sure that you hang in there with me, because the way we're gonna be doing our preparation and the way we go through this process may be different than what any of you are accustomed to. So with that in mind, if you look at the right-hand side, we have two standards that we're going to unpack. So if you go back to that no-show chart, I want you to look at the standard. And when you look at the standard for 7.10C, it says new standard, revised drafts for clarity, development, organization, style, word choice, and sentence variety. And then the old standard said, 7.14C, revised drafts that ensure precise word choice and vivid images, consistent point of view, use of simple, compound, and complex sentences, internal and external coherence, and the use of effective transitions after rethinking how well questions of purpose, audience, and genre have been, and I can't see the very last. Can you see the very bottom?
Yeah, addressed is the last word.
Okay, thank you. So right now, I want you guys to go to your template. That was the blank no-show chart that said number 1 that you got from your resource folder. Some of you had an opportunity to print yours off because you remember in part 1, we asked you if you wanted to have those items printed to please have them available. So whichever your situation is, we're gonna take several minutes to unpack this standard. Now, before we unpack this standard, I want you to kind of think about some things that we're gonna show you on the next slide that you should be considering as you are unpacking this standard. The left side is what students must know. The right side is what do students have to show in order to demonstrate mastery. So Dr. Smith is gonna kind of give you some more things to think about as you are analyzing what to unpack on your no-show chart.
And as you're analyzing that standard with your team, as you're preparing to look at the data, there are some key things to keep in mind as we go through that process. We really want to ask that question and keep it foremost in our minds. What does a student have to know and do to show mastery of the standard? I know that when I was teaching, that was something that I really wanted to be aware of at the end of the class period. Had they done that? Well, you've got to take that a step backward now, a step back. What does the student have to know and be able to do to show that they have really mastered that standard? We need to be aware of that. And then also there's a really important aspect of this in terms of charting that, in keeping a physical record of the discussions that we're having and the discoveries that we're making. We need to have in that meeting a visual anchor to reference throughout the process of talking with one another. If you're doing this with one teacher, and sometimes that happens, you're sitting side by side, you might do this on a sheet of paper between the two of you that you're sharing. But with that larger group in that data meeting, you'll want to use a whiteboard or some chart paper to keep an accurate check on the discussions that you're having and the things that you're adding to that analysis. It's really crucial, as we talked about in the first part of this, that everybody in the meeting be able to see that and reference that, and even if they're just glancing at it in between thoughts, to have that memory of what is being placed up there, instead of just having a secretary who's writing on a sheet of paper that only she or he can see, or you doing it, but having that reference that really is there where everybody can look at it. And then the last major point that I'll make here as we're analyzing the standard is important too, and that is the leader goes last. And you might be wondering why that is. I've done all this preparation. I've come in here loaded and ready to go. And I'm the smartest person in the room, maybe you're thinking, and that may be true. Why shouldn't I go first? It'd be more efficient if I did that. And that's maybe true. Maybe it's not true. But the reason the leader goes last is really to fill in any gaps that have not been surfaced during that meeting and letting the teachers do the major thinking. We've mentioned building capacity several times, and I'm sure we're going to mention it again. But this is a part of that. All of us who became campus leaders and district leaders, we were teachers. We had someone who helped us develop those skills and develop that thinking muscle that really is required in all of this. And if we as leaders are managing this in a top-heavy way, then those teachers, the assistant principals, instructional coaches, department heads are not getting a chance to build that capacity. We're not letting them. We're doing the lifting for them. It's as if you go to the gym with your son and you get ready to lift weights and you say, you know what, I can probably do this better than you. Let me just lift this weight for you. Your child's not gaining any muscle by doing that. You are, perhaps, but your child isn't. And so really we're talking about the same kind of a process here. The leader goes last. Again, we want the leader to fill in those gaps, but we want to give the teachers and those other people in the meeting an opportunity, because the other reality of this is that sometimes those teachers are going to come up with things that we just didn't think of. It may be because it's a content area that we're not as familiar with. More than likely, it's because they are really good at what they do, and they're going to surface things that we would not have come up with. And if we are running that meeting, and perhaps in a way that intimidates them from speaking up, then there's a lot that's going to get missed. And the people who suffer because of that are going to be the kids who's learning that we're trying to impact positively. And so keeping it in the forefront of your mind all the time, what does a student need to know and be able to do to show mastery? Have a visual reference in the room or with you, between you and a single teacher in the room for a group. And then the leader goes last. Fill in those gaps. Use your preparation to fill in those gaps if they exist. But let your teachers do some of that heavy lifting because it's important.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Now, Dr. Smith did a very good job of giving you a lot of information, and that information was interchangeable, meaning that he gave you some key actions that will take place in a preparation part of the data meeting, and he gave you some key actions that's going to actually take place in the data meeting. So right now, I want to hone you back in on the preparation part, because during the preparation part, we're going to recommend that there's no show chart in the standard. You have a copy for each one of your leadership team members. Give everybody a minute to unpack the standard for themselves. And then, as Dr. Smith mentioned, you can have one up in the room, so that way when you all are debriefing, then somebody can chart the collective genius of the group. This is what I got that students should know. This is what I received that students should be able to show. And then that way we're making a collective chart. So just think about that as we are interchangeably going between the two. During the prep part of the meeting, here's the standard. Everybody have it maybe on a handout like I have given you guys. Here's your no-show chart. We're going to take 1 minute, guys. Now remember these time stamps that you see throughout the script, and I'm going to discuss that as we go through this. You want to really adhere to those because the goal is to go through the entire process by the end of the meeting, whether it's our 45 minutes or whether it's our 90-minute time block. We want to make sure that we give more time to the most important component of it, and that's the reteaching. We'll talk more about that when we get to the do it section. But for the sake of this, what we're going to do is give you several minutes to go back, look up at this standard. What, according to this standard, does students need to be able to, or do students need to be able to know and show according to the standard? So for example, if I'm looking at, and again, I'm looking at both parts of it. I'm looking at the new standard. I may want to unpack that one first, and then I may go to the old one. For the sake of time, just to give you an example, I'm going to go to the old standard. If I look at the old standard and I am unpacking it, I may say that, well, students need to know what it means by precise word choice. What does precise word choice mean? So I may have my I may put on my chart precise word choice as an area on my no-show chart. Now on the left still, I may also put, well, my kids need to know what are simple sentences, what are compound sentences, and what are complex sentences. I may have all of that written on my left-hand side. So I'm gonna close my mouth and I'm gonna give you several minutes to continue unpacking the standards. If you notice what I did in my example, I showed you where most of your nouns are gonna go on the left, and a lot of what kids need to do to show demonstration of mastery or your verbs will go on the right-hand side. But we'll look at some examples in a moment. We're gonna go ahead and pause, give you several minutes to unpack these two standards on the no-show. And remember, on your chart, just focus on the very top portion. Don't worry about filling in anything that says after stars. We're not there yet. You're just filling out the top part of your no-show chart. So let's go ahead and pause and give you an opportunity to peruse that. Okay, excellent. So at this particular time, let's go ahead and see how well you had an opportunity to unpack this particular standard. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and we're going to look at some examples. Now, this example that you're going to see here is not inclusive of everything that you should have copied down. This is just to kind of give you an idea of how unpacking the standard may look. And we all may not have it written in the same form. The main point is that you are able to identify from looking at that standard, here's what kids need to know. They need to know the types of sentences. They need to know simple, compound, dependent, subordinating clauses, and complex sentences. And then on the right, you may have put students need to be able to punctuate simple, compound, and complex sentences correctly using a comma or a comma and a conjunction. So this is really you synthesizing what students are need to know and what students are going to be able to, how they're going to be able to show mastery of that particular topic or that particular content. So again, this is not inclusive. We'll give you an opportunity to see all of those other different areas that you may have written when we get to that part for you to be able to check your answer. But right now, what we want to go ahead and do, if there's no questions, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. Give you an opportunity to have an opportunity if you would like to hit the space bar and comment on how did this process make you feel? I mean, what were some of the things that were possibly different going through it this way versus the way you normally do it? Let's take a minute to hit the space bar to unmute yourself so you can kind of share what did this process do for you. And again, this is the first part, unpacking the standard. Let's go ahead and pause for a moment to hear your comments. Okay, thank you guys for that rich, deep discussion. We're gonna go ahead now and move to our next component, which is the teacher exemplar. Now, I want us to go back to the script. If you would, go ahead and jump back over to your script. I'm actually looking over toward mine right now. And remember, we're living in bullets 1 and 2 of the prepare part. You had an opportunity to read the first bullet at the top, second bullet. And so far, all we've done is unpack the standard. But I want you to notice that there is some language that's in the see it portion, which is not in the prepare portion, such as unpacking the teacher's written exemplar. If you were to go back up in the prepare section and look at bullets 1 and 2, you're not going to see much written there, if anything written there, about a teacher exemplar. And then I also want you to notice in the see it part, analyze student exemplar. So student exemplar is not explicitly named in the prepare part, but if you go through the process, you will understand when we were talking about high, medium, and low work, the high student work is considered to be the student exemplar. So I really wanted to name that because as we are going into this portion of our meeting, we are preparing you for all components of the DDI process, of the see it, name it, and do it. We do all of it in the prepare station or prepare portion of the meeting to ensure that when you get in that data meeting, you fully understand the standard, student misunderstanding, and what the best reteach is when we get to that particular part. So we are actually preparing for the meeting as if we are conducting the meeting. So I wanted to make sure that I named that because what we're gonna do right now, again, going back into the prepare framework in our brain, we're gonna go ahead and now talk about the teacher exemplar explicitly. What is a teacher exemplar? Spurlock mentioned student exemplar. I mean, okay, he did say student exemplar is the high student work, but for our teachers, teacher exemplar, that's the new academic vocabulary in our system. So let's go ahead and look at what makes a teacher exemplar. Let's go ahead and look at our next slide. And we're gonna read verbatim what we have here on this slide. A teacher exemplar is created by solving an assessment question or essay, etc. So whatever your rigor is assessment-wise, that summative assessment, whatever that may be, you're gonna solve it in a manner that clearly demonstrates the procedural and or conceptual understanding that is needed to show mastery. So I want you to think about that, because often when administrators ask teachers for their high, medium, and low student work, many teachers turn in their key. This is how I came up with determining what was high for my student mastery, what was medium, what was low. Here's my key for this particular assignment. And I want you to be aware that the teacher exemplar is not necessarily the key, the answer key, if it was not created from an actual assessment that is aligned to that standard. I will say that again. Your answer key is not really the teacher exemplar unless that exemplar was created from an assessment. So if we go back to that power standard, if we have the power standard, we've identified it. In this case, we're talking about 7.14C, if we're looking at the old standard, or 7.10C, if we're looking at the new standard. And we know right now, this is something that's gonna be newly tested. There's no assessments currently out for it. So we're gonna have to rely heavily on the assessment item from 7.14C. So as an administrator preparing for this meeting, I'm gonna do the due diligence of ensuring that I look for on my STAR assessment, because that is the rigor in which I wanna ensure that instruction is being delivered. I'm gonna go ahead and look for some sample test questions for 7.14C. And let's say that this particular essay or this particular revision and editing passage is 30 questions, and only 3 of those questions are related to 7.14C. Those are the 3 questions that I am going to bring into my preparation meeting as well as into my data meeting to ensure that the rigor of how kids are supposed to demonstrate is perfectly aligned. Dr. Smith, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, Derek, I completely agree. The teacher exemplar is not an answer key. It's not a rubric. It really is. This is what it looks like when somebody works through this problem, works through this, this assignment, this assessment, whatever it happens to be. And there's a bit of a learning curve there for teachers, because a lot of them are not accustomed to doing something beyond the answer key / rubric. If I'm doing it, and when I was teaching, I was an English teacher, I did a lot of essay tests with my pre-AP GT kids. And what that would mean is looking at the 4 or 5 questions I would have on this essay test and actually taking the time, not just to create a rubric, but actually to work through those questions. I may think that I'm a college educated person, I'm teaching 7th graders, and so whatever I write there is going to be far beyond what they're capable of. But really the point is to create that exemplar, to create that high standard that we are hoping that students are going to be able to aspire to. So if it is math, again, it's a process of working through those problems, not just having the right answer identified, but what is involved in the process of arriving at that right answer. And so I think that that's a crucial understanding there. It's also an important thing for teachers to be doing in the process of planning their lessons. And because there are a lot of things that occur to you when you're working through the problems that you're putting before kids that are not going to occur to you if you're just creating them and then distributing them. But if you're working through them, you can see sometimes errors that are present there. We don't want to give errors to kids. And sometimes you can see the process there as well, and it opens your mind to different ways that kids might arrive at that. I think it's giving you a head start in understanding the data you're going to have later if you've really worked through the process in the shoes of the learner. I think that's a really crucial point to make, Derek.
Thank you for that, Dr. Smith. And before we actually start creating a teacher exemplar, I want to take you back to the script. If you would, go back to your script so you can really see that this is not something foreign that we are adding. We're following the protocol. We're really granularly showing you how this is done, opposed to just saying do it. And again, if you will go back to your WDM, your script, I want you to go to the see it portion, and I want you to see what we've done so far. We're going to go to see the exemplar. So let's say we're in a data meeting. Narrative focus. Today, I want to dive into the specific standard that we're preparing for right now is 7.10C and 7.14C. And remember, we're not doing two standards here. We only have two standards here because we are transitioning from the old TEAC to the new TEAC. If you didn't have any type of TEAC transformation or upgrades going on, or crossover, whatever words you want to use for it, then you would just have one standard. Here we're using both standards because we want to see how it was worded before and what's the new verbiage behind it. And the following assessment item. Notice that is here. Now, if you go back up to the prepare part, you're not going to see anything written about the assessment item. But we are talking about assessment item here. The assessment item that we're referring to is what Dr. Smith and I just mentioned about finding that teacher exemplar, which is going to be that STAR assessment that you're going to create showing the mastery that is required to demonstrate procedure and conceptual understanding. Now, when I say that you're going to create, you're not creating the test questions. In fact, this will really name what we're about to do in this next slide. Let's go to the next slide, Dr. Smith. So what you have here are samples, and you can find this in your folder. So I'm going to give you an opportunity before we go into what's on the actual screen. I'm going to give you an opportunity to go back to your bit.ly. When you go back to your bit.ly, you're going to go to that 7th grade writing case study folder. And when you go to that 7th grade writing case study folder, you're going to access the one that says 7th grade writing case study assessment and principal script. And when this opens, you're going to bypass the script. We don't want to see that just yet. We're going to go ahead and scroll down. And then you're going to see the passages for this. And we're going to keep on going down to the test questions. Now, when you get here, if you would go to the very first question, you're going to notice with the very first question that we have here, you're going to see numbers 13, 14, and 15. Do we have questions before that, Dr. Smith, that we can go up to? Yes. Now, if you notice, we're not going to address the questions. That's the end of the passage on page 8. If you notice, there's 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Those do not have anything to do with 7.14C or 7.10C. The ones that are relevant to this particular standard is 13 through 15. So we're going to take an opportunity, and I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to read questions 13, 14, and 15, and you're going to mark this up. You're going to pretend that you are the student. What would you like a student to do with these answer choices to show that they truly, fully understand if this answer choice A is incorrect or if answer choice A is correct? You're gonna mark it up as if you're that student. How would you want a student to demonstrate that this is the right answer and that this one is the wrong answer? You're gonna do that for numbers 13, 14, and 15. Now, at the end of the 5 minutes, and remember, I told those of you who are not content area people, do not worry about the English part. If I'm not an English teacher, it's the skill. So I just want you to go through it. This is going to be a totally safe environment. I want you to take the time to go back up to the passage, to the sentences that are referred to answer 13, 14, and 15, making sure that you're marking it up like you would want a student to mark it up. We're gonna go ahead and go back to our slide deck while you are working on 13 through 15. If you notice on our example here, you see only 13 and 14. Your goal is to work 13 through 15 in the time allotted. And if you are drawing blank about, okay, what it is that I'm supposed to be doing, if you look to the left on the gray charts, you're creating a teacher exemplar. Now, as you are creating this teacher exemplar, remember, it's okay for you to make any markings in the actual passage. That is also going to be relevant if you would like to. But right now, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and we're going to resume back at the end of those 5 minutes. Okay, so thank you for your return. Let's go ahead and kind of talk before we actually start sharing out. What were your thoughts about this process? If you're looking at the recording of this, just jot down some reflective thoughts about how did this make me feel? I mean, what does this remind me of? Any of you that are familiar with Paul Bambrick-Santorio's work from Leverage Leadership, the first edition should really have connected this as being backwards design, because that's exactly what you're doing. You're designing your instruction backwards. You're starting with the end in mind. And whenever we take this approach, we're ensuring the rigor of the instruction that we're going to be delivering that first time around. Again, going back to part 1, if you remember the statistics that Dr. Smith had given regarding the amount of time that we are spending in our classrooms, really wasting kids' time because we're giving them either inappropriate grade level content, or we're not giving them information that is rigorous and aligned into the assessment in which they're going to be evaluated on. So whenever we have this opportunity, we're ensuring the academic rigor, we are ensuring quality tier 1 instruction, and we are ensuring that our students are getting what they need at the appropriate time. So before we go to showing the actual example of how this should have been annotated, Dr. Smith, do you have any thoughts that you would like to add to this process?
No, Derek, I really don't. It's a very important process, again, to walk through it with fidelity. And again, as I said a moment ago, to put yourself in the learner's shoes and to go through those questions in the way that you would expect them. Sometimes we are teaching our kids some strategies as we go through this, some test-taking strategies. And that's the kind of thing that we want to emulate here as we're working through this process, and not just take the easy way out of circling a letter and moving on, but really going through that thought process.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. So let's go ahead and look at our next slide. Okay, so when you see this next slide, this is what you should have done for numbers 13 through 15. And again, safe environment. For those of you that's not English teachers, your answer choices should have been 13B, 14J, and 15A. I mean, and do this in your meetings. I mean, we're not worried about answers as much as we are worried about the process of ensuring that our students are able to explain explicitly from us looking at their work why an answer choice was correct, why answer choice was not correct. So if you look, this is what you should have done on your work. Some of you may have annotated the keywords in all of the questions. For example, some of you may have taken number 13 and what is the best way? And some of you may have highlighted or underlined best way. And then you may have circled combined sentences 3 and 4, because these are key words. I mean, best way indicates, and guys, this is something that we'll talk about in a moment. A lot of times our kids don't really explicitly understand that word best, and it is bold in all caps for a reason. That's to indicate that when you look at A through D, you're going to see some answers that are correct. But what is the best way to combine sentences 3 and 4? And we'll talk about how can we explicitly teach that to our students in just a moment. But I want to give you an opportunity to just kind of peruse this before we go further into that teacher exemplar. Do any upgrades that you may need to do to your document, and then we'll go ahead and move on to our next portion of the teacher exemplar. Okay, so you've had an opportunity to do some upgrades. What I want you to really think about as well, we didn't have a whole lot of time to do numbers 13 through 15. I only gave you 5 minutes, and that was intentional. You want to do the same in your data meetings. You don't want to give teachers an extended amount of time, because remember, those time stamps are important. We're going to rely on the collective genius of our teachers in the DDI meeting, and we're going to all be doing some upgrades to the work that we have. So we don't want to spend too much time making sure that teachers or administrators have time to do all of the questions. It's the skills that we're transferring. What I also want to mention is we want to ensure that our students are also annotating the passages. So just kind of think about that as you go along in the social studies classes. Kids have anecdotal information that they have to analyze from different works, historical works. Have kids to annotate, to highlight, to summarize key points on the outside of the paragraphs. Make this your expectation, because this is going to help you when you go back to analyze student work to really understand what is the student misunderstanding here. And we're going to talk about that more when we get to the analyzing the student gap from the exemplar. But in order for you to be able to really be able to tell misunderstanding, it has to go beyond a student simply circling the answer that he or she thinks is the correct answer. We want to make kids justify, as you have seen here in this example, why they chose this answer, why did they not choose this answer. And that's going to give you as a teacher a more in-depth information about where the gap lies for this student's understanding to this particular standard. Let's go to the next slide. So I want you to think about this question. Before we get to the student exemplar, you've had an opportunity to create a teacher exemplar. This is the exemplar because this is what we want students to demonstrate in order for us to know that they have shown mastery. And you're going to see a lot of times through this process, especially in ELAR, and sometimes even in social studies, where kids can annotate the mess out of some stuff. I mean, they have the right key ideas on the east side of the paragraph. They've done a great job of not just highlighting everything, but highlighting those key points. But then when they get to the answer choice, they choose the wrong answer. We're going to talk more about the why that occurs a little later on through our process, but I want you to think about this. Procedurally, the kids can show mastery of that, but conceptually, they don't understand what to do with that. And in the same regard, if we don't have our kids to procedurally show us their understanding, then a lot of times, conceptually, just them choosing the answer, we can't backwards, we can't unpack their understanding because we didn't give them the procedural steps to think through the process. So kind of think about that as we continue through this process. And I want to give you an opportunity to record, why is creating an exemplar from the aligned assessment important? Let's go ahead and put that in the chat box, and I'll go ahead and check in about 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, we'll check back in to get some comments on your thoughts regarding why is creating an exemplar from the aligned assessment important. Okay, wow. Those were some very deep thoughts that you guys were very reflective in this process. You had a lot of aha moments. as you did the heavy lifting with this particular process of the preparation part of the DDI meeting. Thank you for your reflective thoughts and your comments. What we're gonna do right now with that teacher exemplar, I want you to keep in mind when we are unpacking the standard at the very beginning of the meeting, that is our vehicle that we will be driving the instruction or what kids are supposed to really be able to understand throughout the meeting. So this is not just a one and done. We don't just unpack the standard and then forget about it for the rest of the meeting. In fact, this fluent process is always, we always go back at each key action of our data meeting, with each key action of our preparation, we always go back to that no-show chart. So if you would go back to your no-show chart, I want you to go ahead and look at the portion that says after reviewing release star items, knowledge and skills. That's at the very bottom part of your no-show chart. So you've had an opportunity just looking at the standard. Here's what I think kids need to know and show. But now you've had an opportunity to do the heavy lifting. You've actually taken the aligned assessment. And there may be some new things that going through that procedure, you realize that, hey, you know what? Kids really need to know how to do this as well. So at this particular time, we want to give you a moment to upgrade your no-show chart. Now that you've taken a star release item and you see how it's tested, what are some other areas you feel like kids may need to know and show? Now, some of you may have done an exemplary job from just looking at the standard because you've been teaching a while and you really understand how this standard is tested, and you may have gotten it right at the very beginning at the top. So if you don't have anything to transfer over to the bottom, that's fine. But then some of you may have realized for whatever reason, hey, this is some different type of thinking that I need my kids to be able to procedurally do so they can really understand this conceptually. Or conceptually, I thought they would get it, but there's a lot of procedural stuff that kids need to know. Whatever that is, now that you've taken the release star item test, I want you to add it at the very bottom. And then we'll come back in about 2 minutes to see what your upgrades were. Feel free to share some ideas in the chat after you are completed filling in your chart. If there's anything that you want to mention in the chat box, please feel free to do that. Dr. Smith or I will respond. And if it's good for the collective group, we'll go ahead and open it up for discussion. Okay, thank you for your reflective thoughts. If you would, let's go ahead and look at an example of an exemplar response. This is what some of you may have derived after taking the actual star release test. And if you notice from the first example that we gave, there wasn't a whole lot that was written on the right-hand side on the skills part. But if you notice, a lot more information was written due to stakeholders actually taking a test and realizing, hey, my kids need to know this. For example, we mentioned the best way. A lot of times kids are not really exposed to, hey, there may be some answer choices that are good, but can I determine the best way that this should be written? And usually that's a stumbling block for our students, because often when they're reading through the choices, there are some ones that are very obvious that they're like, no, that's not the answer. But then the very next one, that may be B. They read and it's like, yep, that's right. And then they don't read C and D. But when we're training our kids what the phrase best way means, they know I need to read A through D, and I may have 3 or 4 that are correctly written, but is it the best way to, according to what this question is asking? So we really have to teach them that thought process. If you notice, that was added here as a reflective 2 after taking the test. And you guys may have some other information. You'll have an opportunity to see how well you gather all of the key points that are needed when you have an opportunity to go through your exemplar folder. The exemplar folders is really going to show you an exemplar of what the no-show before at the top, just looking at the standard, and then after you've done the star release test. Okay, now I want us to take an opportunity. We're going to go ahead and transition to the next slide. Dr. Smith, is there anything you would like to add to the exemplar response for the after star?
No, Derek, I think you did a great job of that.
Okay, so if we would, we're gonna now go back to our 7th grade case study. You should have that open already. If not, just go to the folder that says 7th grade case study, and I want you to go to the student work handout. It's the sheet that says student work handout. And we're gonna look at the teacher exemplar that was turned in prior to the meeting with the student work. And this is an example of what you should see when you go to that particular handout in your folder. I want you to look at this exemplar that was turned in by the teacher. And I want you to think about what you just created as your teacher exemplar from the STAR assessment. We're gonna take several minutes and I want you to respond to this question. Where is the gap between the teacher submission and the teacher exemplar you created using the STAR exam? So looking at this that you see on the screen that you're going to look at in your folder, where is the gap between what you just did with the STAR aligned assessment and this what the teacher gave to the students as his or her teacher exemplar? So again, as we give you this time to analyze and compare these two items, your task is written in the gray box. Locate the student work packet, find the teacher exemplar, compare what the teacher used as a key to the STAR release and where is there a gap. And if there are any questions or if you need any support, please access us in the chat box and Dr. Smith and I will assist accordingly. But again, this is in your 7th grade case study folder. You're going to select the student work handout. And all we're looking at right now is a comparison to the teacher exemplar to the STAR aligned assessment or your teacher exemplar that you just created. We'll pause. Okay, thank you. And we were really impressed with the way that you guys are handling your digital resources versus the Zoom platform. Thank you for your patience and thank you for your attention to detail. We tried to make this as fluent as possible and you guys are doing an excellent job. Thank you for that. So here's the key understanding that we would like to really stamp that you should have been able to determine through the comparison. If you notice in this particular example that the teacher turned in, it's not aligned to the rigor of the actual assessment that students are required to take. If you notice here, there's a lot of simple sentences that the teacher used and the students simply combined the sentence with a comma and a conjunction. So they made a lot of compound sentences throughout their example. They never had an opportunity to see subordinating clauses and determine if those clauses were independent or dependent. The students didn't have opportunities to create complex sentences in any of these cases, so they were very limited to what they needed to demonstrate in order to show mastery. Whereas with the STAR exemplar or the teacher exemplar that you guys created from the STAR assessment, students were required to really demonstrate their knowledge of what makes a simple sentence, what makes a compound sentence, and what makes a complex sentence. And to be able to not only decipher the types, but how to correctly punctuate them if they're not punctuated correctly. And this particular teacher exemplar does not expand the way the kids are going to be exposed or tested. Dr. Smith, anything you'd like to add to those thoughts?
I know that sometimes this can be an eye-opening experience for leaders who maybe are not seeing a lot of this work ordinarily until this process begins. Sometimes we make assumptions about the level of rigor that's going on in the classroom, and then we see it, it's in front of us, and we see something that's different. And I think it's really important to have this discovery as early on as possible so that you're seeing the level of rigor that's taking place here, because we do want it to match the rigor at which the students are going to be tested. And the quicker that we are aware that it isn't, the quicker that we can be part of leading that and improving that.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And something, guys, else we really want you, before we head to the next slide, something that we really want to push facilitators into thinking of, not excluding this process of going to backwards designing or using that STAR assessment if a teacher gives you the key. I see that often. We mention it in trainings, and yet when we go out to coach in the moment, this is often a process that is often skipped in the DDI meeting. It's done in the preparation. Principals do a great job with their leadership teams of finding that aligned assessment. They work through it, but when they get in the data meeting and the teachers give their keys, they abandon ship. They don't even mention that STAR aligned assessment. Well, let's not do that. Let's help build the capacity of our teachers to see the importance of them using backwards design before creating their lesson plans. Let's show them the importance of unpacking the standard and going through this process. And again, if we make this the norm and the routine, teachers will develop this skill and start doing this independent of the DDI meeting to ensure that their tier 1 instruction is aligned and beneficial for on-grade learning. So just keep that in mind. If your teachers turn in a key and you guys come in with the STAR aligned assessment, have it copied for each teacher, give each teacher a copy of it, set that timer. When the timer goes off, give them the answers, and then say, okay, now I want you to look at your teacher exemplar, and I want you to look at the exemplar that you just created. Identify, if any, the gaps between what you turned in and what we just created. Give them an opportunity to fill in those gaps so that way they can see the benefit of the backwards design and to ensure that the instruction is rigorous. Next slide, please.
So this really, I believe, is the difference between being an instructional leader and being merely an administrator or an evaluator. Administering and evaluating are just parts of instructional leadership, and in the effective data meeting, leaders must really clearly be immersed in the process, not just arbitrating it from the side. And if we enter into the data meeting with that mindset, we'll be able to monitor the learning, not just the process. And there's a difference I want to talk about. Our role as leaders is not going to be like that of the parliamentarian who stands off at the side and remains silent unless somebody speaks out of turn or does something incorrect. We're going to come into that meeting ready to participate. And if we do that, we'll be able to get a lot closer to the student learning, the student work, and move from just evaluating student learning to actually changing it. And that's what instructional leadership is about. We'll be like the leader of a team of physicians rather than the chief coroner who is looking at something that's really, that's dead. The data is dead, if that's all that we're doing with it. And so really, I just want to drive home those points that you see on the screen there. We're monitoring the learning and not just the process of that data meeting. We're getting closer to student work and moving from just evaluating student learning, really changing it. And by changing it, I definitely mean improving it. And that really is just so crucial. So we're about to upgrade the teacher exemplar. We're going to use that high student work. We need to make sure that we look back in our resources. We get back into that 7th grade writing folder that we have in our bit.ly link, our resources, and look at that in the case study folder, find that 7th grade case study student work packet. It's going to be a PDF with a number of student examples of their work matching what you just saw with the teacher exemplar. So that same assignment that the teacher showed us the exemplar for, the students going through that work. And so we're going to look at that and see how we might be able to upgrade the teacher exemplar. First of all, using that high student work that we have present there. And as we're doing that, we talked about this in our video debrief from part 1 that we did before. There are 2 main portions that we saw in that video clip of the principal leading that we saw an abbreviated portion of that meeting. What we saw is they created and then they reviewed their teacher exemplar, and then we also, of course, saw them reviewing a student exemplar. There's some prompts you can see there that you can use when you are facilitating the meeting and reviewing those exemplars, the teacher and student exemplars. For the teacher exemplar, you might prompt teachers by saying or asking these questions. You could ask them, what are the keys to an ideal answer? And then call on teachers, go around the room, whatever is practical in that moment. What are the keys, the main aspects of an ideal answer? Or you could say it this way, an exemplar needs to include what? And we make a list of the things that really need to be found in an exemplary response. Or we could ask it this way, how does this align to the standard? And sometimes that's a very provocative question. And hopefully you get an answer that's satisfactory to that. How does this assessment, the response to it, really align to the standard that we were teaching that day? For the student exemplar side of that discussion, you can prompt teachers by saying or asking things like, what did students do to show mastery of the standard? So let's really get down to it and look at it now. What did they actually do that is showing that they mastered this standard? We're making that connection between the work and the expectation. Or we could ask it this way, how does your student exemplar compare to the teacher exemplar? Because we do want to see, we want to compare and contrast those examples there. Does the student exemplar offer something that your exemplar does not? And that's okay. It's not that the teacher failed to anticipate something. It's okay that sometimes the student exemplar offers something that the teacher exemplar does not. Because sometimes the student comes up with a different path to mastering the standard than we anticipated. And that's okay. But we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware that students sometimes are doing that. And so that's an incredibly important part of going through this process. We are then analyzing the gap between work that is mastered and work that is not mastered. So we ask questions, what are the gaps that we see between that high student exemplar and the other student work? Because what we've requested from teachers is examples of high work, high performance on this assignment or assessment. We've asked them for medium, we've asked them for low work as well. What are the gaps that we see between that high student work and the other examples that we have? We want to analyze the process as well as the content and really get down to this question too. What do we see students doing that led to this error? It's not just about the what now, it's also about the why and the how. What do we see students doing that led them to this error? Why is there a gap? Why does it exist? And then we want to name that error and the conceptual misunderstanding. We have to establish norms for analyzing this. We need to state both the error and the misunderstanding. We might have a teacher leader model how exactly to go about doing this. And ask, what is the conceptual misunderstanding, the gap that is evident from the student error? Derek, before I go on, do you want to add anything to that?
Dr. Smith, you did a very, very good job of going through those explanations. One point of emphasis that I would like to mention is with the student exemplar, as Dr. Smith mentioned, it's okay when students discover new ways of mastery that maybe the teacher exemplar does not display. Just remember to add those to your teacher exemplar. So again, is that upgrading where here are some things that some other students discovered on the way to mastery. Let me go ahead and add those ideas to my teacher exemplar to make sure as I'm going through this, this is a path that maybe another student who is struggling, I could possibly introduce it to them this way and they will connect better than the way that I was initially trying to show them in my teacher exemplar. So I just want to emphasize the importance of you upgrading whenever your students show a different path to mastery.
And that's a great point, Derek. Thank you for adding that in. So in the chat box, if you would take just a moment there, share just answers, responses to this question. Why is creating that exemplar from the aligned assessment so important? Why is it now, as we've gotten through this process, so crucial to have that exemplar? Take just a moment to respond in the chat box. Great responses. And get a bit of a review, because we've talked about this importance before, but now that we're seeing these student exemplars, there's a new twist. And that new twist is what the kids are contributing to all of this. and maybe the understandings that they had the different paths to mastery we talked about just a moment ago. Great responses. So what we want to do then is go ahead and go through this process of first looking at that high student work. And again, if you look at the packet, there is a cover page. On the back of that, you're going to see, at least I printed two-sided, you're going to see the teacher exemplar. If you keep leafing through that, you're going to see some examples of high work. There is high A, high B, and high C you're going to see in that student packet. I want you to take a look at that and take a couple of moments to do that and compare that high student work with that teacher exemplar. And what do you see there? Does the high student work offer anything that the teacher exemplar does not? And giving us an opportunity to upgrade our chart and our teacher exemplar. So take a moment, look at those again, 3 examples, high A, B, and C, and you're looking for some ways in which maybe that offers something to us there that the teacher exemplar did not. Let me give you a moment to do that. Again, just looking at those high A, B, and C for right now. And once you've done that, we're going to look at the medium and low work as well. And we're going to look at that work now and really looking for some gaps as well. As we're looking through the medium and the low work, we're looking for to answer this question, what are the errors that students are making, those procedural errors that kids might be making? And maybe your mind is going to math, if that maybe is a focus for you. Maybe it's, for me, writing really is the focus that I would have. But you maybe think of it in terms of content, but really think about this process of leading this meeting. What are some errors that kids are making in this example, in the medium and low work, that are leading to this gap? And then also, why are students making that error? So we're looking at the procedural and the conceptual issues in all of this as well. So again, take a moment to look at that medium and low work and think about those questions and looking for maybe some of the reasoning behind it in those procedural and conceptual issues. So looking past the high work now, there's a medium, it says medium 1, medium 2, and medium 3. So take a look first of all at that medium work and look for some gaps that it keeps that from being equivalent to the high work. And then when you've done that, you might also just go ahead and look at the low work. It's labeled low 1, 2, and 3. And what are the gaps that we see there as well, and really answering those questions that you see on the screen. And one thing that I want to point out here is that we're really looking for trends. We're looking for trends to be surfaced in the work that we're doing and analyzing this. It's not so much about looking at the individual work in terms of this individual did this. Teachers will sometimes fall into that, and it's natural because of the relationships that they have with the kids. But sometimes that makes it more difficult for them to see a bird's eye view of what's going on and to see the trends that are developing that really we as a team need to be focused on. So as you're looking through that, and these don't have names on them, you wouldn't recognize them, but really we're looking for trends in that medium and low work. So look for those gaps that you see and the procedural and conceptual errors that kids might be making. Derek, would you like to add something to that?
Dr. Smith, just as you pointed out, this is a really huge struggle in the field for practitioners because, as Dr. Smith mentioned, we get into the mind of looking at kids and we're not looking at student mastery. And remember, this is not tiering. When you do high, medium, and low student work and you're grouping them, you're not grouping them based on your tiers of your students. You are physically checking the papers before submitting them, and based on student mastery, what kids show mastery, what kids are right there in the middle, and what kids did not show mastery. This is not, here's my tier of students. And with that in mind, if you really practice as you are writing your trends, I would probably set a personal timer, especially for those of you who are viewing this on your own. Set about 3 minutes, and just looking at the medium student work in our case study, I want you to just ask yourself the first question. 1.5 minutes, look at and analyze. What errors do you see students making? And when that 1.5 minute timer go off, you got another 1.5 minutes left with that same group, medium students. Why are students making this error? So if you frame your thinking in that mindset, then you're going to be able to identify those procedural and conceptual errors. And then as Dr. Smith mentioned, then you would do the same thought process for your low students. Ask your questions, looking at them collectively. What errors are students making? Why are they making that error? So keep that frame of thinking as you are going through this case study, but more importantly, when you are doing your own students, make sure you keep the same framework of thinking. I'm not tiering students here. I am simply looking at student mastery, and that's how I arrange my students in high, medium, and low. Dr. Smith?
So now that we've looked at the trends, really the point is now to name the gap that we're finding in the student learning. Before we do that, let's look at the name it portion of the exemplar script. So take, again, a look at your script and look at that name it portion that you see there. It's, I guess, toward the bottom of the page if you're looking at it the way that I am. And really, as it says there, we're stamping the error and the conceptual misunderstanding that has taken place. So let me give you just a moment to look at that name it section and just read through that. And I'm going to read through that as you do that. So we're punching it, stamping the error and the conceptual understanding. And the script instructs us to lead the conversation in such a way that we're pointing out that key area to reteach. This has been the point of all of this. So we're going to describe that conceptual misunderstanding or conceptual understanding. And if needed, also describe the procedural gap that we're seeing there. I know when we think about math, sometimes it's the procedural gap is not memorizing multiplication tables. It could be missing habits. I know as a reading and writing teacher, some students would not want to annotate the text or would not do it well. I remember I had a joke sometimes. I would say to a kid, you're not annotating, you're coloring, because the paper would be just indiscriminately marked up. And so they're not annotating work, perhaps that's the problem. Sometimes they're not showing work. And again, to understand why they've made the choice that they've made in a multiple choice assessment, we've got to see some work there that gives us some indication of that, even if it happens to be a reading and writing test, or editing and revising portion as we have today. You've got to see the student giving you some explanation of why they chose this and didn't choose the others. And so we need that as well. Sometimes the procedural gap is there. And then the last thing you're going to see there in that name it section is writing down and or charting the highest leverage action that students will take to close that gap. Derek?
Yes, Dr. Smith. And guys, in this particular part, it's important that we understand that, again, this is not the time to start thinking about tier 3 instruction. This is the time that we are identifying for our students that are medium and low. What is the highest leverage gap that we see that students are procedurally and are conceptually not understanding? And that is what we're going to plan our reteach around. So we should not have a plan for our medium students and a plan for our low students. We're going to choose collectively between those trends that we've seen with the medium group and low group, where's the highest leverage that I'm going to go back and reteach? And yes, it may be true that even after reteaching that and you reassess it, you will see where your low students did not show mastery, but they showed improvement, they gained. So now this is truly an indicator for additional tier 3 support. But again, if you go back and you reteach, and you still have the same percentage of medium students and low students that are not showing mastery or growth, and I didn't do the highest leverage reteach. I didn't identify the highest place to go back and reteach in my tier 2 instruction. So kind of keep that in mind as you are sparring with your team members between this gap analysis. Every teacher, if I have 3 teachers in my data meeting, we all should not leave the data meeting with a different reteach. We should collectively agree on the highest leverage conceptual and procedural misunderstanding our students have that we can go back, create a plan around, and go back and reteach. Which brings us to our next slide. So here's an example, and this is a math example. So if you're a math teacher, yay, you're probably excited to see this, but I want to give you an opportunity just to kind of see the language. Although we're doing writing, we wanted to show you an example of how a procedural error could be written once you go through your two groups of students, medium and low, and how a conceptual statement could be written showing here's the highest gap. So right now, I just want you to look at the example. And again, this is just for you to see, okay, with this TEAC, the 7th grade writing TEAC, I want to go ahead and write a critical mass error, which is simply, here's the procedural error, to use the language that we've been using in the training. Here's the procedural error that I see. Because remember, you asked that first question for both groups, which will lend itself to procedural. And then if you notice the language that's in the statement of the conceptual misunderstanding. So here is the conceptual misunderstanding that I see with these two groups. And that's how you're going to write your statement to ensure that you have identified the highest leverage reteach for our students, whether it's procedural or conceptual or procedural and conceptually. And our next slide. Okay, so we're gonna pause for a moment and we're going to kind of reflect on where we started our journey at and really look at the time that we spent today in part 2. And these are aligned to what your objectives started off with. And these were the things that you had an opportunity to do in part 2. You've done a great job of interpreting the standard. You created a no-show chart. You made sure that you created your teacher exemplar using an aligned STAR assessment. You upgraded the teacher exemplar based on that STAR assessment as well as the student exemplar. And remember, when we upgraded, we went back to our no-show chart. And when we went back to our no-show chart, we did that based on the aligned assessment. And when we upgraded the teacher exemplar, we did that through the use of the student exemplar. Now, I often get, Mrs. Broad, can we add any upgrades from the student exemplar to the no-show chart? Answer to that question is absolutely. I encourage you to do that. So it's all in one place. And then a fifth key action that we had an opportunity to do was to analyze student medium work and the low work. And again, when you see and you've identified that misunderstanding overall collectively, you want to add that to your no-show chart as the gap. So you just simply, some teams will actually do another chart paper where they keep the no-show chart explicit, and then they will write on another chart paper the gap. And then they will write out their procedural gap that they noticed from the medium and low group, and they will write out their conceptual gap. And in that way, that drives for what we're going to cover in part 3, the do it section of the data meeting. So these were the areas that I wanted you to reflect on. These were key areas that you did in the preparation part. And I want you guys to go back to that WDM to really see fluently how we have gone through in a granular way steps 1 through 6 as they tied into the prepare and the see it part and the name it part. So if you notice, when we were looking at the see the exemplar, I took you to the standard that we're going to dive into, and I also mentioned the assessment item that we were going to be doing. We'll go ahead and look at that second bullet to kind of summarize our journey along with those 6 actions. You guys interpret the standard. You took 1 minute. In your own words, you wrote down what kids were supposed to be able to know and show from just looking at the standard. You charted it. Anything that was missing, as Dr. Smith mentioned before, you will absolutely go last. You had an opportunity then to unpack the teacher's written exemplar. You took about 1 or 2 minutes to review the exemplar. And our example, since that was your first time, we gave you 5 minutes, but notice in the actual meeting, I will also recommend extending this time from 1 to 2 minutes to 5 minutes for your teachers to work through that exemplar. What were the keys to an idea answer? These are some of the questions that you're guiding teachers through as they are unpacking and developing that teacher exemplar. How does this part of the exemplar align with the standard? Is there anything you would add to our chart of the unpacked standard? And as Dr. Smith mentioned, principals, if it's something key, or facilitators, if there's something key that the teachers left out, you add it to the no-show, but you go last. And then after that, we had an opportunity to analyze the student exemplar. And here in the script, let's take 1 minute. How does your student exemplar compare to the teacher exemplar? Is there a gap? And then you were able to upgrade the teacher exemplar if you saw that there was a gap in the way students have demonstrated mastery. Do students have different paths, evidence to demonstrate mastery of the standard? Does the student exemplar offer something that your exemplar does not? And then if you would, go ahead and look at see the gap. I'll move to the sample of the unmastered student work, and that's the process that we took you through. So I felt that it was very important to take you through why we do these 6 actions in the preparation, because when you go back to the data meeting and you're using this script, you're gonna be well prepared, well versed in where teachers should go when getting to the step 3 or the do it part of our see it, name it, do it protocol. So wonderful job today. I know it was a lot of information, but again, you guys did a very good job of demonstrating those key actions and really making a connection between the why we are doing this in the prep and how it transfer over into the actual data meeting. Dr. Smith?
All right, and that does bring us just about to the very end. As we did last time, if you were present for part 1, you know, we had a very brief survey that we asked you to fill out. There is that survey again for part 2. We really just want your feedback to make sure that we are doing the very best that we can. And if there's some place where we are unclear or where we really just haven't provided enough information, we want to make sure that in the future we do a better job. So if you can provide us with that feedback, we would greatly appreciate it. There are different options if you are viewing us live today. Thank you for being here. And if you are viewing us in the self-paced format, so be sure to check that you're doing session 2, whether live with us this morning or in a self-paced format. So please, if you would, fill that out, just take a moment or so, and we would just love to have that feedback. We are going to be back for the 3rd part of this, see it, name it, do it. We'll be back for the do it in part 3 next time. So we hope that you can join us for that as well. We're going to put everything, bring everything together in part 3. It's all going to make sense. If you're looking at your script, you're probably looking now at the back of that, and that's where you're going to see that do it part. And we will walk through that next time. Derek, anything you want to add before we send them home?
Dr. Smith, it was just a pleasure being here again with you today, delivering part 2. I can't wait for our delivery of part 3. Thank you very much, sir, for your participation and your expertise in this process. I know our stakeholders that are viewing are going to really do what's best for our kids implementing this process.
Sounds great, Derek. I echo that. A pleasure to work with you today and all of our participants. We hope to see you again when we do part 3. Until then, stay safe. We'll see you then. Thank you.